Dane Rose here, and for all of those joining me for the entire year, thank you for the journey. This is intended to be watched as week 38 in a year of higher growth and well-being. And in week 38, I want to explore taking control of your state. And as I was getting out of bed just now, from feeling a bit restless and new video ideas coming to mind, and then wanting to do those, and then realizing I'd written this board out, and so I need to do this first. Excuse the pause. What I realized was I'm actually practicing this by getting up. Last week was do it now. So here we are. Now, having a sense of control of our state is an incredibly pivotal point in our evolution. I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but some human beings appear, if you kind of look at the graph of state, appear to hang on tenaciously to a low state. So you have high states up here: joy, innocence, humor, play, pleasure, connection, etc. And then down here you have jealousy, envy, hate, rage, shame, despair, loneliness, etc. And so knowing that in the yin and the yang, in the duality of any continuum, we each have this full range within us, with some of us having stronger predispositions. In Sonia Lyubomirsky's book and research on happiness, and thankfully there's starting to be some science on positive states and happiness. She talks about the fact that studies indicate that we have a set point. We have a set point in our state that we default to. And for those more fortunate, which seems to correlate with people being more right brain, interestingly. They have a very high state where it's just naturally happy, cheerful, joyful, positive, etc. And for others, the set point is very low. And what this means is in the tension, or the paradox of influence and control. It may not be a paradox, but there's this continuum of on a probability field that moves from some point that we'll call influence to a point that we'll call control. And this is vague and debatable because, for example, let's take the air conditioner that's in my apartment. So it influences my temperature. And it's interfering with other influences of my temperature. What I ate. The Tibetan monks and lamas in some situations can sweat in a freezing blizzard. So there's one's thoughts are, each thought generates different states. I play with this myself when I generate night sweats, which can be very good for my health. And so when I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, I will induce a night sweat and sweat all night, and often wake up feeling great and burning, for lack of a better word, the virus out of my system. And so notice how deep we're getting into meta, to review an earlier week's focus. But, I think we would all agree that if all things were equal, we're in the midpoint, that meaning there's absolutely no other variable involved, and there's a 10-mile-an-hour wind blowing this way. So we just create a little virtual imaginary environment in which there's no goals, there's no motivations, there's no directions, there's no context. We're just on a flat surface. The only variable that's giving us any sense of orientation at all is there is a 10-mile-per-hour wind going this way. And at whatever point we get bored and decide to walk, we try walking in different directions. And even if we're unconscious, we will settle. It will feel best to our body, and there being no other reference points to discourage it, we will walk downwind rather than into the wind. And that's at 10 miles an hour. Now, if and what's called a probability field is you need a certain amount of numbers, ideally more than 100. But what's called a probability field is that, on this continuum of influence and control, is that if you have 100 people and you expose them all to a completely neutral environment, except that there's a 10-mile-per-hour wind going that way, a majority of people, when they start to move, will go downwind. This is an influence. Now, you say it's not a control. It's like advertising. It influences you. When I see an advertisement for a beer, and then I notice that I get up, walk over to the fridge, and enjoy my beer more. It's very satisfying. It builds congruency. Now, I also notice what I'm doing, meaning I notice there's a pleasure in copying. There's a pleasure in being influenced. There's a pleasure of saying, oh, they're eating, a great grilled cheese sandwich in that movie. I could eat a great grilled cheese sandwich. And then I think about it and say, why not? And then I will influence it. I'll use my bread. I'll do my favorite cheeses. I'll add mustard and mayo and onions and stuff like that. But the influence, meaning I would not have come up with the grilled cheese sandwich without watching the movie. Now I'm also watching myself watching the movie, and I'm watching the influence it has on me. And I'm deciding, do I mind? I'm thinking, well, advertising sure does work. I guess that's why they're doing it. I'm getting a beer because I just saw that. Do I mind that? Meaning, and I look, and if I could use a drink at that point, I think, okay, I wouldn't have done this without this, but I'm not against it. If I am against it, let's say I have a client meeting, I have the influence come up, and then I resist the influence. I walk upwind, so let's say it's 10 miles per hour. Now, but this 10 miles per hour wind, which influences a majority of people, could also be $10. In other words, if you're in a completely neutral environment, you set up 100 people in the environment, and there's absolutely no influence, no appointments, no motivation. There's nothing to motivate anyone to do anything. They can't even see a horizon or a sunset or anything. Light is all uniform and all that. You've created a completely psychologically neutral environment. You don't even know what the directions are. The only influence is either this 10-mile-per-hour wind, or someone comes in and says, anyone who walks this way will receive $10. $10 will be added to their bank account after the experiment. Anyone who walks this way will have $10 deducted. I mean, that's a little bit, if we're sticking with 10, that's actually creating $20 of variability. Anyone who sits here will have nothing at all. Again, the majority of people will at some point want a little variation in that balance between boredom and chaos. They will want a bit of variation, and why not walk the way of the $10 in a completely neutral environment? And so this is influence as we commonly know it. Someone, and we will talk about this. This person is a bad influence. So-and-so would not have done that if it weren't for the influence of X, Y, and Z. They wouldn't have stolen the money except that their friends were egging them on. Absolutely true. It is influence. But we don't consider it control until there's a life-threatening influence. But think about it. Even a life-threatening, I will shoot you if you don't do X, Y, Z. The law distinguishes that kind of life-threatening self-defense influence to someone just being egged on socially. But this is an interesting distinction, because in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if someone has survival and security met and they need to belong, their primary motivation will be to belong if the group they associate with is a criminal group, and if in order to belong one must commit and participate in the crime. Is there a difference psychologically between a human being, like in the probability field? If we have 100 people to create this neutral environment, so it's completely neutral, except that if this is a pretty strong influence, completely neutral, they can do whatever they want, but if they don't commit the crime enthusiastically, they will be shot. Well, what is the crime? They have a gun to their head. You must take me to your sister. What are they going to do? They don't know. Then they kidnap the sister or whatever. So whatever the crime is, so the person knows it's wrong, knows they are being used, knows they are necessary to some degree in order for the crime to be committed. The influence is the gun to the head, or the gun to the heart, or I'll beat you up, or the baseball bat, whatever it is. So you've got the influence. That's the only thing. And so you've got a strong internal thing that says, no, I don't want to do this. And then you've got an equally strong thing that says, I do not want to be shot. So now, in this situation, will it be the conscience of doing the wrong thing or the fear of being shot that is the predominant influence in the choice? And again, at what point is it control versus influence? The courts distinguish between, if a gun's to your head, and that's clearly threatening survival and security, a base need. But I would suggest that the need to belong and the need to be loved, which is Maslow's third hierarchy of needs, is as powerful in some individuals than the need to live and or survive, which means that if they are dependent on a given source for love and belonging, and do not have that need met outside that source, that source may be able to manipulate as effectively as a gun to the head. I don't know if you joined me in reading Sherlock Holmes when I was young, but I think The Beryl Coronet was the story of the devoted daughter who, betrayed her father, stole the coronet, and let her brother go to prison rather than betray the lover who asked her to be his accomplice. And the variables in this are things like, did you have a strong bond with either of your parents, or was that need for belonging on an emotional level constantly starved and withheld, creating a very high level of pain that in some cases you'll see this transcend death, where someone will willingly choose maybe a 90% probability of death to stay with someone they love, where they either meet the need of belonging or they're meeting another need. And so the question is, at what point does this influence become control? And I think we would agree that if we go to an extreme, so we've been playing around with things like 10 mile per hour wind, we're in the same flat surface, no access to fancy sci-fi gadgetry that we can invent to avoid confronting the issue. But the wind increases to 50 miles per hour. And we would learn the statistic of what happens in this type of environment by watching 100 random people, the more the better, and then watching what most people do. Most people will turn away from the wind at 50 miles per hour. Most people will huddle. This is not control, meaning they could stand up and open up their jackets. They could practice flying with their jackets. You know how it's fun to run and leap into the wind as a 5-10-year-old. They might do that. But after a time, is it 5 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours? After a time, probably 96% of the people would huddle in a way that minimized individual impact. And if it was a courteous and communicating group, they would probably, with some sense of ethics and principles, they'd probably put the elderly in the center and then maybe do a rotating shift as the shield guard of the wind and loan jackets with the people huddled in the middle. This is the principle of fairness, and there'd probably be someone speaking up in a group of 1 to 500 people along those lines, and people would say, yeah, that's fair. And so we would have a predictable response, which we might have to do a few experiments to find out what that is exactly. It's a reasonable hypothesis. Western democratic type fairness thing that people would cooperate along those lines and would get low to the ground to avoid 50 miles per hour wind. Now, at some point, as that wind increases and increases, and we're again deep into this meta that is actually the video that I wanted to talk about, was this gap between, this perception that we have around influence and control. So I'm just weaving it into this video. At some point, let's say the wind increases to 80 miles per hour, 100 miles per hour, 120, 200, 300, 400, 500 miles per hour. Somewhere on that point, before 500 miles per hour, the entire group of hundreds or thousands of people are going to be, assuming again a smooth surface without destruction, are going to be swept downwind, regardless of whether or not they want to stand in the face of this wind. And if this is a very difficult thing, like just notice what you're doing with this thing, because there's a statistical probability that there's a demographic of people that are going to fight this idea of losing control with every possible thing imaginable. Well, that wind doesn't exist. Well, what if they had a V-shaped thing? What if they had rubber boots? What if there was a wall? And we'll create every possible scenario to obfuscate the fact that in a certain environment we lose all freedom about certain things. Again, there's endless loopholes in the complexity of reality. I could say, well, you when you are in prison, you lose all access to caviar, and I'm sure you can look up in 1853, the King Edward III permitted a royal prince to have access for caviar in their cell, and blah, 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 blah. So, see, it can happen. It can, but it's not in the prisoner's control. 99.999% of the time. Anymore, it's in your control whether to be blown away in a 500 mile per hour wind. Now, the question is, at what point does influence become so intense that the idea of freedom does not change the situation at all? So, like, in a certain area. So we're talking about the wind blowing 500 miles per hour this way, and the desire to stay in one place. Well, or this at some point you're just going to be tumbled through the air, rolling it uncontrollably. But for example, while all that's happening, while you're being smashed into other people, erratically, etc., by a 500 mile per hour wind, you can probably still move your pinky. If you tuck it in, you can probably, in a 500 mile per hour wind, move your pinky, or open and close your mouth, or hold your breath. So it's not that you lose all freedom, you lose the freedom to be stationary. Now, how this ties in with the question of knowing that we all have the potential to enter a very low state, and we all have the potential to enter a very high state. And we've all been around people who have seemed to exert willpower to sustain a low state. So they're down here in bored depression, which is not a very fun place. Now, the hypothesis of capitalism is made on the basis of enlightened self-interest, meaning that everyone will do what is best for them if given the choice, which will create a regulated market because the seller will sell for the highest price they can sell, the buyer will buy from the lowest price, and the market will be found in the middle. This is the premise of capitalism, is that there is enlightened self-interest. And yet there are a number of interesting psychological situations for both animals, meaning, for example, there are situations in which animals are dissociated with erratic thing, where they are not treated consistently and they are tortured, like given erratic electric shocks. And in that situation, they will try to escape initially. But if they cannot escape and the erratic torment continues, they will curl up in a fetal position and just do absolutely nothing. They will just give up. And what's interesting is once they've entered the state of giving up or despair, the scientists can open the cage door and even, make sure the animal can see there's a way out. And the animal will not walk out of the cage door, because the deeper message they've learned in a traumatic state is that it doesn't matter what they do, they cannot control their state, so they're not going to do anything. They cannot get rid of the pain. They cannot feel good. They cannot control this horrific traumatic force. And they can find no intelligent pattern around it. And so the only thing they feel they can have any control of is doing absolutely nothing, in which case the erratic pain persists, but they're not expending energy to feed the program in any way. And they're not experiencing disappointment or exhaustion or, further despair. They are hopeless, so they're not going, they've actually gained a sense of control by reducing their volatility. Because when you have hope and then disappointment, that's volatility. So what they're actually doing in the end is they're establishing that a fetal position and doing absolutely nothing gives them more control of their state than any other strategy that they've tried. They've tried screaming, they've tried jumping, they've tried fighting, they've tried running, they've tried doing this, they've tried doing this. And the erratic electric shock as the trauma center point has taught them that they have no control over the trauma, basically. So they are collapsing. Having collapsed, they resist changing the state of collapse because the collapsed state has a modicum of control. Because they've reduced the volatility of hope or effort or change, which is still within their control. They're not hoping, they're not efforting, they're not changing, they're not trying this and that. They have stabilized the volatility. And so one of the things that this would naturally lead to as a hypothesis to maybe be looked at is that when we are in trauma, when we have no control over the trauma, we will seek to minimize all internal and external volatility within our control. And you can even see this with people like, why do you hold your breath when you know you're going to be hurt? See, the hurt, like someone's coming at you with a poker and you close your eyes and you tense and you hold your breath. You're becoming immobile in anticipation of shock as your way of having a modicum of control of one's state. And this makes sense if you believe and have experienced that no matter what you do. See, like a confident martial artist, if a red-hot poker is coming towards them, will analyze their opponent's weakness. But if this is a robotic arm that can move at will with a load-bearing capacity of literally 10 tons, meaning that the martial artist can do absolutely everything they could possibly do within their cage, controlled by the robotic arm. And the robotic arm is on Like if the martial artist either has enough experience or just knows, this algorithm is 100% random. There's not a human being at the control. No one is watching. And no matter what they do, they are as likely to be speared by this red hot poker if they do this, the other. The natural response upon realizing this is to go into fight, flight, whatever is in the trauma, whatever is the successful, whatever that person has experienced successful in the past. They will tend to do it irrationally because trauma response is irrational. They will go into fight, flight, or freeze until that doesn't work, which at some point in an erratic thing with a red hot poker and an arm capable of moving around in every bit of a cell at 10 tons, weight, and no way to get out. It is just a matter of random time. Corner isn't any better than the middle, whatever. It's a random thing. It's just a matter of time. Sometime in the next year, at the very latest, that arm is going to make contact with that human being. And if it's moving at a space where it covers every surface within an hour, when the person gets exhausted and collapses, it will impale them with a red hot poker in sleep. And this produces a very consistent response, which will vary on the degree of odds and stuff. Like if they know someone's trying to rescue them and there's that kind of story, they're much more likely to be active. Because the idea is that you feel more in control when you're dashing around, and so you might try and dodge this way and that way, but in a truly erratic algorithm, it's as likely to stop after moving an inch this way and come back at you. But you're still likely to, what a human being and an animal will do will hang on to the illusion of control, and they will take control of as much as they can. For example, the choice to stop and do nothing is a choice that increases state control. Like, I am choosing to do absolutely nothing, and I will be impaled with a red hot poker when that comes, and use these last times to visualize memories. So they've still got control of their mind, going to find in search of meaning. But why is all this important in our understanding of take control of your state? It's important because many of us in unhealthy environments get arrested in a low resonance state. Arrested in this sense, not meaning by police, but stuck. Like an arrested age, not being able to mature beyond that age. So, and the question is why, and where we will be stuck, and what to do about it. So, so the first question is, why do we get arrested in a certain state? Well, let's say you have a erratic boss. This is you should be able to, relate to observing this particular experiment in action. You have an erratic boss where half the time they're trying to boost you up, and then the other half, they pull you down. It's otherwise known as brainwashing, but they boost you up. Come on, you did great, you did better, and then you do the exact same thing, and then you feel terrible. And they tell you you're a complete shit and blah, 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 blah. So do this, you feel great. Do this, you're shit. Do this, you feel great. Do this, you're shit. you're doing the same thing. What's happening is a completely erratic boss, and you learn that this boss is this way. This has absolutely nothing to do with you. Your behavior does not affect whether or not you get abused or praised, how much the boss drinks that day, whether or not a customer outside of your control called in, whether the wife was nice to the boss or the husband was nice to the boss. That's the variables, and that's erratic. It's not like they go through a bad spell that's linked to a cancer, so you expect it to go back to normal after a cancer. It's just an erratic thing. Now, the first time your boss praises you and says, "This is a wonderful job, keep up the good work, you're going to do really well here," you go into a very high state. This is normal if you're not traumatized, if you're not cynical, if you have not been repeat offended in this terrain. The natural thing, you come into the world as a child, you're around healthy, well-regulated people, and a healthy, and which it's very human to want to please. I made you happy. That's wonderful. I get to share in that. That's beautiful. Okay, so I made you happy. Hooray, I feel great about myself. Empathy. Mirror neurons. Now, you're doing the same thing and you're delighted because you get to make someone happy. Now, you're doing the same thing 2 hours later when the person barges in and says, "This is atrocious, this is not good enough." And you haven't changed a thing, and your state absolutely collapses. And 2 hours later, I'm speeding it up so you get the point, but it could be a day later, a month later, a week later. 2 hours later they come in and this is absolutely great. And they're not even acknowledging that they're crazy, which they are. They're not regulated. They're not attuned. They're changing, but they're pretending that you're changing. So you're going to go up and down as a yo-yo. You're going to be up and feel joy and then you're going to start to anticipate what happens is the future. This is our relationship with the future. So we're here, and we've experienced the boss go up, down, 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 up, down. And this, when it involves shame, is a traumatic experience. Now you're here at the present, and the future is unknown. But experience tells us that unless a force equal or greater, let's say the owner of the company arrives and then suddenly your boss's behavior evens out and it's always the same. It's always the same when the owner of the company arrives, but when the owner of the company isn't there, it's always erratic. So you can learn that. But unless a force equal or greater enters the ecology of the dynamic will continue up and down, up and down. So you expect that when you go down, the next step will be to go up. When you go up, the next step is going down. Now, in the first period, before you understand the pattern, you thought it was about you. So when your boss first came in and said, "Welcome to the company, this is wonderful, you're doing great work," and da-da-da-da, you thought that was about you. And so you work harder and you try more. You do more of what was rewarded because it feels great too. It feels nice to be included, belong, etc. But then, even though you've gone up, your boss comes in and completely chews you out. And this happens a few times and you realize it doesn't have to do with you. So this creates hurt. You realize, I don't matter. That's the message. My behavior doesn't matter. I don't matter. My feelings certainly don't matter. Otherwise, they wouldn't just do this volatile, extreme thing. Love you, hate you, etc. So the question then becomes, what's the typical person do in this situation of volatility? Well, the typical person develops a protection from the volatility and reasserts personal control of their state See, when they first grant control of their state to an external source, I want to please you, and the contract assumption is I will do more of what you reward if your behavior is consistent and if I get rewarded. Bonuses, praise, public praise, corner office, etc., then I will do more of what you want. But the contract is you've got to reward me, for doing it. And it can't change. It can't be like, today you gave me a bonus for closing a sale, and then tomorrow you gave me a public humiliation for closing a sale. It's got to be a consistent thing. The rules, nobody likes playing a game where the rules change and they're not included in the rules. Which in a sense of addiction and stuff, they're not. Did the person binge that day? This kind of thing. So when the rules are changing, number one, when, particularly in our culture, where hurt is shamed, we actually, we will play this sociopathic game with children, or children will play it with themselves, where they'll say, would you like the popsicle? Oh, yeah, I'd love a popsicle. Oh, you stupid thing. I'm not giving you the popsicle. Would you like the popsicle? Well, no. They've already learned. They already know the script, and they're not interested because they know it isn't a popsicle. It's a humiliation. It's a game. And so what happens is the word, would you like the popsicle, gets rewired from a pleasure thing to a pain point. And in doing so, the person regains control of their state. Hey, you want a new popsicle today? No, thank you. Well, the bully, the teaser, the joker, the sociopath goes off and finds someone else who hasn't been burned by them in particular. So who says, hey, yes, I'd love, thank you so much. And then they start to give out and extend, and they laugh, and everyone laughs at the person who's had their state affected negatively by trusting another human being. This is sociopathic training. And in our culture, because it's so painful to identify with the abuse that's been done to us in the growing up process, what we do is we focus on, we actually shame the victim, and we dissociate from the victim of sociopathic behavior as a general rule, because we want to dissociate from the part in ourselves that knows exactly how horribly, unspeakably humiliating and painful that is. We don't want to feel that part in ourselves. We know that part has been done to us. We don't want to feel it. So we dissociate from the victim of abuse so that we can dissociate from the part of us that knows what that feels like. And so this is a sociopathic culture, when everyone in the culture doesn't have real hope of changing an abusive environment like that, or healing the deep memories of sociopathic wounds in the self. So they pass the wound along to the next generation, because what's the worst part in that thing? When you've been humiliated, when you've been tricked, when someone has deliberately hurt you and everyone's watching, the most painful part is when everyone else turns away and leaves you alone in shame. Shame is always being on the outside, the outcast, the unwanted. And you are alone, hurt, and then you get the message from the entire circle that there's something wrong with your hurt, so we don't want it. And we don't want you as long as you're there, but you are there. So this goes very deep into you are unacceptable. And this wound leads to a determination. I'm not going to trust. I'm not going to allow someone to do this. I'm not going to show my feelings. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to punch them next time. I'm going to get a gun. I'm going to blow up at the school. I mean, this is where it leads to ultimately. When this plays out, I'm going to shoot the fuckers who abandoned me, who did this to me. And so it's all reasserting control of state. And then what we consider to be the adolescent test of, quote, maturity is when we cannot be taken in, when people can beat us up and we don't show any feelings or break down, when we have control of our state, regardless of what anyone else does, we consider that a cool, respectable, and it is cool, it's sociopathic. It is the extreme lack of empathy, the extreme resistance to all response to abuse is a sociopathic state. And the person who is in a sociopathic state has control of their state. The person in an empathic state in a hostile and abusive and shocking environment is constantly grieving, affected, bursting into tears. And if the person is really sick on the control game, the person builds you up first so that the crash can be harder. Come on, trust me this time, it's going to be fine, it's going to be fine, it's going to be fine. Come on, come on, come on. And then way up there, no, this time, see, you're an idiot, you trusted me. But this game goes on until there's a suicide, until there's a sociopathic state. It goes on until the person takes control of their state in one manner or another. And back to the boss example, they may be mildly effective, but they start curbing their feelings to be within a much smaller range. And so their goal is to say, like, I'm not going to pay any attention to this boss. This boss is crazy. This boss is insane. I'm not going to pay any attention. When they give me a compliment, I will be polite, not because I want the compliment, not because I want to get near them, not because of any of that. I don't like them. I don't want to get near them, blah, 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 blah. And the control of state will be reasserted in this bracketing. And how it's done is that when the boss walks in and says, oh, how wonderful, next time, the person doesn't see anything the boss is saying. It tunes all that out. And it instead pauses and anticipates tuning out the criticism, which will soon follow. And then tunes that out, anticipating the praise. And so by understanding the pattern, by stepping back from it, by dissociating, and by taking away all the empathy and meaning of the words, the person is able to be completely unaffected. And that's when the, quote, cynical, mature, quote unquote, woman in an abusive marriage walks in knowing she's going to be berated and blamed for everything, blah, 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 blah. Walks in, or him, doesn't matter. Walks in, waits, says the things she needs to say, waits, says, okay, this is going to take him about 5 to 10 minutes to berate and abuse me, okay. Berating, okay. Then I'm going to need to say this, so I'm going to say this. And he or she is just completely walled off. They understand the pattern. They have no interest in being involved in it. They don't want to feed it. They don't want to be affected by it. They want control of their state. Now, when someone is trustworthy and when someone is trustworthy and consistent, that's a big part of trustworthiness, you then give them control of your state. So when a boss always rewards good behavior, and you want to be a good employee, and the behavior is clearly defined, you give your boss more and more impact, more and more empathy, which means your boss can affect your state more and more, but your state is in good hands. Because if you work your ass off, you're going to have a really high state. because you're going to give great significance to your boss's words, and your boss's words will be consistently fair, consistently clear, and consistently helpful. And in this situation, opening up will, and then the occasion where you completely blow it, your trust will go up even higher if your boss knows your intention and sits down with you and says, I want to talk about how you blew this and why, and how you can do it better next time. Then your state goes up even higher. It's like, I have a floor. I really love this boss. I love this boss. I admire them, I respect them, because my state has a floor. They're not going to take the opportunity to pummel me into the ground when I'm low. When I make a very human mistake, I have the right to make a mistake and still be treated with respect. And I know they could, and I know some part of me, because I've had enough abuse, would believe that low remark, but my boss is not going to go there. And the more that is established, then sharing in responsibility for mistakes, I didn't train you well enough, and let's look at what's going on and partner to create better. We create enormous amounts of high trust, which leads to greater and greater empathy, which leads to greater and greater ability to affect one another, will certainly be affected by the boss, and good results coming from it. So that's a boss that someone will die for. That's a boss that someone will move company for. That's a boss that someone will take a pay cut to work with that boss, as opposed to a tyrannical boss, etc., who offer a bit more money. This is and that's because what we really seek in this kind of the golden triangle in all this is high state, deep empathy, and safety. That is the golden triangle in the middle. High state, deep empathy, and safety. Now, I'm going to suggest that anyone who is in this state is very difficult to dislodge. Anyone who is safe, in close empathy, in a very high state, is very difficult to dislodge out of that, and will never willingly say, I prefer a lower state than a state that is stable in a high place with both the exchange of love and safety. The safety comes from the trustworthiness of where the empathy is. Obviously, this is why addiction is such a killer of this dynamic and a killer of state, is because when someone is highly volatile in their state for whatever reason, chemical imbalance, addiction, trauma, reset button, this is the big trouble with PTSD, is person's fine, then a muffler goes off that brings back a flashback of so much grief and shame. They watch their buddy getting killed again in Vietnam, this, that, and the other. And suddenly they feel completely powerless. And they cannot maintain the high state in this state. They cannot control the amount of mufflers going on. They feel rage at the powerlessness, and their state plummets down. And then when someone invites them up again, they're inviting a volatility that is the opposite of state control. And so then it's much easier to say, fuck off. And what we burn through is a process of reestablishing control of our state. We burn through a process of reestablishing control of our state by maintaining a low state willingly that gives us the illusion of control. And I did this with my father. when, he would humiliate and humiliate and humiliate and humiliate until a point of hatred. Now, if I showed the loathing and hatred, then he would humiliate that. So that was not a stable state, because then I would hate him, then he would humiliate and knock it off. And so the stable state that I was able to develop with my father was completely sociopathic, meaning I'm not going to show any emotion whatever, so that I have state control of my body, which as soon as I can control all my facial expressions, research shows that, for example, if you put a pencil in like this, you start feeling good, because when your muscles, which are associated with smiling, are forced into a smile position, it becomes significantly easier in that influence control spectrum and dynamic to it becomes significantly easier to think of a happy thought than a sad thought when you're like this. So you can try it right now. Just get a pencil and it lifts the energy a little bit. And because what happens is your brain, which is a consistency generating machine, it's an integrity generating machine. So if you're in a terrible state, your brain is going to ask why, and then it is going to invent a story that explains and creates congruency with how you're feeling. Whether or not the story is correct, it doesn't matter. The brain is unhappy when there is a thought, it feels unhappy, crazy, alarmed. When the thought is, my life is great, and the feeling is, I want to die. It's like, this is such a big discord. We've got to knit these two back together again. We've got to integrate the self. And so it's going to do a couple of things. It will probably try and convince the part that wants to die that life is worth living. Come on, let's look at the bright side. Look at this, look at this, look at this. You have your house, you have your Porsche, you have your airplane, you have your tickets to the Mets next week. You have this, and this. Come on, life is worth living. So, and then if it can lift the feelings up to life is worth living, and that makes, or it will downgrade the story into the depression, and obviously this is much easier when you have the Porsche and the Mets. It's very easy to get stuck in a low state if you feel like shit and you look around. It's like, I got fired, I can't get sex anywhere, people look at me as if I'm a pervert, I'm probably never going to go anywhere, I have nothing but miserable childhood memories, and I have a drinking problem I've dealt with for 30 years. A story that all of this is for the best and somehow going to magically change after 30 years doesn't seem very probable. It seems like a setup for disappointment. So I feel like shit, and the fact that my life is complete shit seems like the reason for it, and the fact that it's probably going to continue seems more reasonable than it's suddenly magically going to change, which it hasn't done in 30 years. You've got integrity though, but you've stabilized the state. And what I'm suggesting is that, particularly for traumatized individuals, which is our entire culture, is a trauma-based culture. It's the Civil War, racism, sexual abuse, domestic violence, what we witness at home, addiction, the abuses that go on in school, bullying. This is an abusive, trauma-based culture. And it may be getting better per capita. That's the good news. My parents abused me less than their parents abused them. That's, by a 30% margin. Maybe 40%, so that's good news. But that's not how the child or our felt experience is. We don't say this feels great because it's 40% less. Like if I slap you on the face right now, it's going to hurt. And if I say, well, it hurts less than if I slapped you on the face 3 times, I mean, you'd agree, but it doesn't change the fact that that hurt. And we are a trauma-based culture. The reason, all of this is leading up to understanding why we will actually or appear to fight moving into a positive state when there seems to be an opportunity, but in our mind, this is not an opportunity. It is a short-term path to higher volatility and the feeling of helplessness that comes when we have no state. So when Dad has made 100 promises and hurt us, 95% of the time, 95% of the time when we got excited about those promises, we crashed on the other side of that because it was a betrayal, it was a lie. And it was a very painful crash in the case of like a father when you're 5 years old and you cry and your whole heart is broken because this promise is not being kept. And it's not just the broken promise, it's the message you don't matter. When you cry and express your deeply felt broken heart around that, and you realize that your father, your lover, your mother, etc., your boss, understands exactly what you're going through, but doesn't care because the TV is on, or they need to get that drink, or they need to go do that drug, or whatever it is. When you understand that your deepest despair is less important than a football game, the message of pain that comes in, the message of unsafety is, I never want to be that alone again. I never want to be in the absolute agony of needing someone to help me feel valuable when I'm not even worth $1 in their mind. When my complete despair, they'll sell it for $1. They'll sell it for a hit. They'll sell it for a drink. And this is, of course, much more devastating for a child to experience because the child doesn't understand the level of pain that the abuser is medicating. Meaning, everyone has mirror neurons. And if an abuser, like a bully or whatever, is comfortable inflicting that level of despair on you and gets satisfaction, what they're really getting satisfaction on is being able to have someone join them in their state, in a state they have known and felt similarly helpless in. And this feels like if they can't take control of their own state to lift it up, taking control of someone else's state and bringing it down feels like, it's better than nothing. So there's a pleasure around that. We don't teach children or people just about anything intelligent or healthy about emotions. We are an emotionally illiterate society that keeps it that way in high school. It's stunning. It's stunning the amount of illiteracy when every single one of us is always feeling something all the time. It's stunning to think that there would be no research taught, no training, no protocols, etc., to directly deal with our state. But when's the last time you heard about this being taught in high school or college? Unless you're taking a psychology degree. And then they rarely make it personal to what's going on in the classroom. It's all, it's all this abstract stuff out there. That's where this culture is comfortable. A trauma-based person is comfortable when the emotion is out there, not inside, because inside is trauma and it doesn't feel safe. A trauma-based culture is comfortable when the emotion is out there and out of view. It's taboo to bring it into view. This is how you know you're in a trauma-based culture, because when you're in an empathic culture, people know what you're feeling with before you even tell them, number one. And number two, if they don't have dread and trauma and issues going into those feelings themselves from being abused and neglected, they meet you there. And their greatest joy, one of the greatest human joys for a healthy human being, is participating in another human being's healing. This is a profound joy, to participate in another human being's healing. When that doesn't happen, it is because the person cannot participate in the healing, because they have the same disease. Emotions in this American life, one of the very few accidental areas of emotional research, accidental, again, we're trying to keep this stuff taboo in this culture, is the study of the viral nature of emotions. The fact that one's proximity to other people who are depressed is the biggest indicator on a statistical level of whether or not you will be depressed, etc., etc., etc. Which means that everyone wins when we help disease. Everyone wins when we help everyone out of disease. And no one wins in the long run when, excuse me a moment, no one wins in the long run when we make other people sick, i.e., the person who goes around infecting their co-inhabitants with malaria, with HIV, with herpes, with dysentery, with flu. The person that goes around with a needle and injects their community with these diseases is biologically illiterate. It's biologically illiterate because the viral nature of disease means that if they don't already have all these diseases, they soon will. Because you can't compartmentalize disease. You can't say, okay, I want you to feel traumatized. I want you to be bullied and humiliated. But I want everyone else around you to be happy. Mirror neurons and empathy and the fact that abuse cycles happen virally will preclude that. It will not happen. And so what will happen is all that will come right back at you, the trauma, blah, 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 blah. And so the intelligent, the informed biologist does everything they can to mitigate disease. If they possibly can, you've got flu, swine, it doesn't matter what it is. Let's help you get better. Here is some medicine. Because even in a purely enlightened self-interest paradigm, you're gonna have drinks with a friend of the parent of my daughter, and your virus can easily come right back to my daughter. Just may take a couple of days for the virus to work its way through. But when you do not heal mentally, emotionally, and physically the viral patterns within your environment, when you play an us versus them game, it's fine for you to be sick as long as we're not sick. Remember Reagan and HIV. It's fine for the homosexuals to have HIV. We don't want to bother with it because it's not us, right? And the opportunity to heal a major epidemic before it became a human epidemic passed. And Reagan's friends, as well as everyone else, has died and suffered by HIV, by the stupidity of that paradigm, the ignorance of us versus them, the idea that there can really be an us versus them when we come to ecological dynamics of any kind, emotions, viruses, and if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you understand that the first level is safety, security, and survival, if you and I do not meet the safety and security, survival needs of every single human being on the planet to a point where they feel confident that of their own volition they can be safe, that they can survive, you can absolutely guarantee there will be crime and there will be traumatic repercussions, meaning, first of all, they will experience trauma when they believe they will not survive in the hostile environment that does not include them. Doesn't matter if it's someone in a slum who can't get clean water. It doesn't matter if it's a terrorist over here who's had his sister's wedding bombed and feels like he cannot control the United States sending attack drones into his country. It does not matter who the person is. If there is a person on the planet that believes that they cannot survive and control their state, they are driven to that. Every human being is trying to survive. This will be for a reason: a lack of empathy, a lack of honesty, too much corruption, insensitivity on the government, malfunctions. There will be an enemy out there. So the person will be induced into trauma the moment they feel their life is in danger. Number one. Number two, once a human being is induced into trauma, they will go into fight, flight, freeze with one primary objective: to survive. Now, whoever is the enemy, the World Bank that's flooding their land, the corrupt politician that allowed, faulty forest practices to cause flooding in the, whoever it is, that becomes the enemy to fight, flight, freeze around in a sociopathic state, because trauma induces a sociopathic state as a survival mechanism to defend against sociopathic people. A sociopathic person is a person who acts knowing their actions will affect other people in an adverse way, in a perhaps life-threatening way, but does not let that knowledge deter them from acting. The car that speeds down the road knowing there's occasionally children in the road, who knows a child could run out, but my speeding and arriving 30 seconds earlier to whatever is more important than keeping those children safe. This induces trauma in a parent, etc., etc. And this induces a matching sociopathic state in the victim of a sociopathic state. So it takes a sociopathic state before someone can be so blasé about someone else's children that to save 10 seconds, I'm going to race around a corner in an area where there's children. I'm going to break the speed limit, race around the corner. And that is a sociopathic state. The person in the sociopathic state is in that state because some trauma of their own has not been addressed by a single person in the cultural environment, and they have nowhere to go for help. So they get in their car, and in an addictive thing, maybe they're blowing off speed, maybe they're controlling their state by this sense of control you get when you go really fast and you can control your vehicle. They're reestablishing state in their coping mechanism at the expense of someone else, who then must feel they're the enemy. So this is how trauma spreads. This is how, in Gary Slutkin's work, violence spreads from one person to another. This is why the greatest predictor of a new eruption of the epidemic of the disease of violence is the last case. The last case of violence is the best probability statistic available to us of where the next eruption of violence is, because violence, like a virus, is contagious. when I slap you on the face, there is a much higher probability that you're going to raise your voice and or do something violent back, either immediately or more calculatingly. If you perceive your life or social status is in jeopardy, you're going to come and slash the tires later. You're going to wait until there's a point when you doing this little thing would, save my daughter's life, and you just won't do it. And that will be that's when the violence that came towards me goes back. That's why violence is best treated in Gary Slutkin's work as an epidemic, as opposed to as a moral or a cultural phenomena. Now, if we understand that all of this leads to a basic premise, and the premise is this: in a traumatic culture, we do not feel safe until we, in some means or other, reassert a stable state that we feel we are in control of, whether we are in control of it or not. And this brings me right back to this video, which is I'm not able to fall asleep. In that half-between state, I don't feel like I have control of my state. My mind wanders and thinks about this video and that and the other. And I do feel like I can control my state if I'm talking in front of a camera, because I have to be totally present. And so my sense of control goes up. But there is an underlying aggravant that I don't have more control of my state when I'm just dozing, and so there's a certain tension there. I feel the same tension with my dog. My dog has decided to rush around, so there's been 2 points I've needed to pause, where my dog has control of my state because he's in my environment, and because, particularly when you have early childhood PTSD, any unknown, your brain registers as a possible life and death threat that no amount of logic can deter. So all the dog has to do is go somewhere invisible and make some noise that alerts me that something that I don't understand is in the room. And I immediately have that panic. And so this gets to, this leads up to a principle of that a lower state that we feel we are in control of is preferable within this domain that I've been exploring to a higher state that is highly volatile. Now, the same could be looked at in investing terms. Most people have fear around losing all their money. Fear and greed, the two biggest enemies of the investor. This translates into a trauma. Why is money so important? It's just paper. The greed-fear dynamic, the fight-flight dynamic, is a traumatic response. In the money sense, if I get tons of money, I'll be totally safe, right? That's the illusion, right? And if I lose all my money, I could be on the street. I'll have no social status. I won't be able to buy an upgraded car when my neighbors do, and I will look and feel like the small one, like the loser. I will not be able to control my state. I need the money to buy these things so that I'll look good, so that every time I watch a TV commercial, the TV commercial will help me reinforce my state. See, I am an important person. The ad just told me that people who have BMWs are important, and I have a BMW. And the reason I got the BMW was because I need that support and I want it, and I'm going to get it BMW is going to spend a lot of money to make me feel like I really am important as long as I buy their car. And the same ads are going to be in a subtle way dissing other people. Like, it's going to show, it's not going to say all people are equal. It doesn't matter what car you drive. That doesn't sell cars. So there's the collusion, and there's a bargain that gets made. We'll spend, $100 million convincing everyone that if you drive around in a huge clunky Rolls Royce and save up all this money to do it, everyone is going to agree that you have money. And everyone in this culture will agree that therefore you're more important than if you don't, and that you are not a loser. And just the thought of not being a loser, oh my goodness, I mean, that is such a shame-based dynamic within the culture. It's an underlying dread of trauma, because as soon as because how does it work? Well, first we say you're a loser, and then we say losers don't matter, they're disgusting, losers shouldn't get sex, losers shouldn't get jobs, losers shouldn't have friends. Losers have no right to dignity. They're just useless. So this is a complete shame dump on people exhibiting certain behaviors that a given culture doesn't like. And, the Aborigines in Australia used to kill people just by deciding, if you transgress whatever their culture said, we will pretend you're dead. We will not acknowledge you at all. And the tribal people, upon being ignored by every one of their loved ones and they would just curl up in a fetal position and die. That's how powerful these messages are. And in a culture where people need to belong, companies will play on this more than anything else. This person belongs because they have this kind of shampoo instead of that kind of shampoo. It's bizarre, but it works. All they have to do is create social settings of the way people look at the person with the product and the way people ignore the person without, and it is a subtle form of, brainwashing, shaming, a subtle form of saying you might as well die if you're not going to be smart enough to have our product, and so this volatility, when it's outside of our control, leads to helplessness. Helplessness cannot take us out of the traumatic state. We cannot be rational until we're out of the traumatic state. When we're in fight, flight, freeze, we are not rational. We are sociopathic. We are instinctive. We're numb. When we're rational, we can then be empathic if we're in an environment where we're capable of doing that. But when we're empathic, we're volatile. And so the goal on an instinctive level is to move from volatile, sociopathic, terror, trauma, into stable, safe, where it's safe, even if it's familiar, like the child that will run back to the abuse, the domestic partner that will go back knowing he or she will be abused again and again and again, but it's familiar. It's safe because it's constant. They know what they can expect with that person. So they can feel like even if it's a horrible state, it's worse than the uncertain, like today this happens, I have no idea what's going on. I can't control my state. This is an absolutely desperate place. When you're in trauma and cannot control your state, you can see suicides, you can see all kinds of criminal activity, etc., because it is a desperate place to be. The person needs support stabilizing themselves. And if they cannot get it there, they will usually pick the lowest point in their stable environment, and they will hold themselves down. See, because here's a trick. When you're feeling joy and innocent, and someone comes over and slaps you in the face, your joy and your innocence are both crumpled in a second. You go into a traumatic response. The drop from joy all the way down to, oh my God, am I with an absolute insane person that's going to kill me, is so big, one feels disoriented by the drop. This is why joy and innocence are the most vulnerable states known to human beings, and it's why we protect ourselves against them intensely on all kinds of levels. This is very important to understand if we're to understand why people seem to insist to be cynical, to be depressed, So if we understand that high and volatile in a traumatic environment, in a painful environment, is terrifying, is inducing trauma, then we can see the stabilization at a certain low-grade depression, at a certain cynicism, is the first step in healing, the stabilization. Now, if someone doesn't feel stable and centered, if someone then tries to lift them up, they push them back. You'll find this around largely women in sex, for example. It's like, what is the woman protecting against when she refuses to have sex, even when she's turned on? She's protecting against volatility in the experience that sex too early leads to attachment and leaning in, and then the person isn't there, and she realizes she's out of control of she's lost control of her equilibrium and her state, and she feels completely alone there, and then she's humiliated there, and then if she tries to talk about it, it's a male chauvinistic culture. Emotions are not honored. We don't teach people how to help pull someone out of that attached, leaning in, and falling state. It's the equivalent of saying, trust me, I'm going to be here, trust me, I'm going to be here. They lean back, you pull your hand away, they hit their head against the concrete floor, they're in shock, they're in trauma, and the other person walks away and says, you're an idiot for trusting me. I got what I needed. Bye. This is sociopathic. It's not empathic. It's emotionally illiterate. It's not intelligent. It's not win-win. It creates emotional viruses that then ripple around and come back to bite us and reinforce. And it's a loop. We keep making each other sick. So the person gets control of their state, and they will not leave a low state until they believe they have mastery of a higher state. And mastery of a higher state. The person who can sustain joy, bliss, innocence, and trustworthiness with safety and deep intimacy with another human being will never voluntarily leave that state. That person is never going to say, it's so much fun being cynical, that this beauty, this joyful innocence, it's boring, it's immature, Let me just go back and be a cynical, bitter son of a bitch. No, never. But the person who's up in innocence, maybe they took MDMA, with an inappropriate partner, etc., and they crash on the other side of that. It is not a stable state. Then they come up again, and they crash again. They come up again, they crash again. They will hold on to something like hate or rage or revenge or anger or something, because these are easy states to manufacture. Meaning, you cannot manufacture joy and innocence while someone is jacking you around, stealing your things, sleeping with your wife, You cannot maintain joy and innocence in this, because the other person's disease is coming into you at a density that's hurting you faster than you can heal the disease. The infection, it's like, if someone starts injecting arsenic in you, you may have a great blood treatment program, you may have a great diet, but if it's coming in faster than you can clean it out, you lose control of your state. This is when the person will grab to a low state. You see people like, get revenge. They're like, revenge is an easy state to manufacture, and it's stable, so you've got control of it. You can plot your revenge. It's a very low state. No one who had true mastery of state would choose revenge. No one. No one who had true mastery of state would choose hate. It's just not fun. Or rage, or despair, or depression, or feeling nothing. You know, the people that want to be cool, i.e. low on the sociopathic empathy continuum, down in the sociopathic dimension, you know, so cool, sociopathic, not empathic and warm. People that want to be cool are people in pain who don't have control of their state. And they're looking for control of their state. And they're thinking that by being more sociopathic, by feeling less, they'll be able to be stabler and be less fazed by the pain in their environment. That's the goal of being cool. Nothing bothers me. Someone attacks me, I've got a witty remark. I don't even let pain show on my face. I'm cool. I.e., I've got control of my state. So this is a huge enterprise, and it's critical for understanding adolescence. It's their primary focus. Can I get control of my state? If it has to be hate, I hate my parents, and that's the one thing that doesn't change, that'll be what it is. If it can be, I love myself, and they can have control of that, they'll pick it in a heartbeat. But if every time they do something they love and they're feeling good, I thought I did it, it's like, why did you break the door? Yeah, you know, you always do this. You are a piece of shit, basically. They lose, now they've lost the self-love, and they experience their parents in the most humiliating way, dropping their state in a matter of 30 seconds. It's like, I'm not going to let those bastards do it again to me. Not again. I'm going to hang on to this. Hey, why don't you just come right back up and forget them? No. I am having revenge on those fuckers. You know, they do this, they do this. See, and now the moment has passed. Now the adolescent is controlling the dimension and maintaining their state. And what they learn is that parents and this and that and the other can knock them down, but the parents can't bring them up again. You see, joy can be knocked down because it's frankly tragic when a parent betrays, beats, rapes, etc. their own child. It's tragic. It can be crushed like innocence and heartbeat. Joy can be brought down easily. But if you're in rage, see, you've got all kinds of tricks to keep that rage. Someone comes at you with a gift, what are they after? They're after, you know, the bastards. It's not, and if they really love me, they would have done this. So you can maintain the state indefinitely. Someone brings you some flowers. What a corny act. They just want to have sex with me. I know what you men are like. You know. And see, they can defend it. They can just make up stories that even the most beautiful, happy person is really out to get them. And then when the person says, fine, you don't want it, see you later, bye. Then they create up a new story about how they were never loved. See, you know, that's why they weren't. So they maintain the state. They've got state control. And the reason I'm explaining all this is in such detail is you are nicer than you think. This is a phenomena of exiting this is a cure. It is a method for exiting the traumatic state of fight, flight, and freeze that is necessary for you to come back into your human portions of your brain. You need to do that as the first step of forming safety. Once you feel stable, then you will try and stably build up. And this is where we're going to talk about taking control of your state. So, ready for the tools. So first of all, choose when to cause and when to allow, going back to an earlier blogger on masculine and feminine, to create the state you want. So the environment around you, remember that windstorm, etc., is just blowing the way it is. If it's sick, it's blowing you in a sick direction. If it's healthy, it's blowing you in a healthy direction. If it's confused, it's volatile, whatever. It's influencing you to be like it, particularly since so many of us are still meeting our needs for love and belonging. The big message is be like us and you can love and belong. The trouble is when being like us is sociopathic, racist, chauvinistic, abusive, you know, misogynist, all of this stuff, be like us meets the need by belonging by contracting our disease. So it's problematic. If at all possible, if you can meet your need to belong, maybe in meditation, maybe in prayer with the divine, maybe with an animal who is consistent. Dogs are in some ways so much healthier. A good, loving, loyal dog that you have a bond with, you can have a higher state with that dog because the dog is going to be consistent in the way that your alcoholic brother won't be, in the way that your narcissistic mom who will do anything to avoid looking at what's going on won't be. The dog will be stable. And so you can choose to go into a more beautiful place with a dog when you've had a lot of abuse, etc., than with a human being. Choosing when to cause and when to allow, causing being the masculine expression, the yang, feminine, the yin, the feminine expression, to allow to create the state you want. Now, what do I mean by this? The environment is like a current. It's blowing you, it's washing you in a certain direction. You get in a river, the boat's going downstream at 7 miles per hour if you do nothing. So if you allow, you will drift down at 7 miles per hour along with that river. But what if the river is going in the opposite direction you want to go? This is when you have to be masculine. You have to assert. You have to head into the current. So you choose the state you want to be in. You assess the environment and the state that it's pushing you in. You assess how fast. Because goes back to that reality. You're in a river and you don't have a motorboat and you're swimming and the river's going downstream at 8 miles an hour. You can swim upstream at 5 miles an hour, but you're still going downstream at 3 miles an hour in net loss. You can't overcome the environment with just your natural swimming if you're in a river taking you in the opposite direction. Now, what can you do? Well, ideally, the graceful thing is you find a river within the environment that's taking you where you want to go. Okay, this river is flowing south. Is there any river flowing north? No, that's up the mountain. Okay. How about a ski lift going up the mountain? No, hasn't been built yet. How about a trail? Yes, there's 3 trails. Any support along the way? Well, you could hire this and do this. Okay, I'm going to hire someone to carry my bags, I'm going to go north on this trail. You are fighting the environment. You're getting out of the river that's taking you in the opposite you want to go. You're resisting it. Everyone's saying, come on, belong, be like us, be like us, be like us. And the call to belong, the call to be loved and belong, to be normal, is strong. You have to pull out of it. You have to pull back. You have to step back. You have to turn around. You have to assess the situation. These are all willed choices. These are masculine choices. This is masculine energy going against the environment to assert one's self. This is me. I am distinct, masculine, yang. I am distinct from my environment. I am an individual, yang. America is one of the most yang, masculine cultures on earth. So I'm me, this is me, that's not me, I'm me. So, and me is up that mountain, so I'm going to do this, and I'm going to save the money so that I can buy this, I'm going to buy this so that I can do this, and I am going to go in the direction I want to go. So the key in taking control of your state is first you need to decide the state you want to be in. And secondly, you need to assess in any moment in time, is the environment pushing you away from that state? I want to be peaceful and serene. I'm walking along and suddenly I hear a loud heavy metal concert. I keep walking, it gets louder. I realize I cannot be anywhere within a mile radius of this concert without being flooded with heavy metal. This is taking me out of the state. I try to use willpower. I will be in my state. I will be peaceful. Sanitarium. I will be peaceful. it's not working. The state is winning. What are those kids doing? And that's winning. It's pulling me downstream faster than I can go upstream. So I pivot. I walk in the other direction. I put on headphones. I block my ears. I start singing. I do something with a willed choice to change the environment that will help me create the state that I want. When I'm successful at that as a conscious choice, I then see, this is the trick. You will exhaust the masculine, the yang. You will exhaust your willpower very rapidly. So that what you do is you use your willpower use willpower to create an environment that allows you to relax into the state that you want to feel. So you use your willpower to find the way that will help you. Example would be, if you're getting tired to climb up the mountain, and you can hire some Sherpas to carry you up the mountain. The will that you use to earn the money is now being transformed in the will to you've created an artificial environment that is making it easier for you to be in the state that you're in. So this is the use of masculine energy to take control of your state, to create an environment that is conducive to the state, so that you can switch into the feminine pole and surrender to the new state, surrender into the environment that your masculine has put you into. Like I'm in Thailand right now as a very conscious willed choice, because there's certain feelings that are escalating right now in the United States. And so when I take myself out of the United States and into Thailand and then spend time with very specific people, those feelings go down. Now there's still some part of me that has those feelings, but I'm now in an environment that's pulling me towards the state that I want to be in, rather than an environment that is pushing me into the state I don't want to be in. And in doing so, I gain more of a control of my state. And because the control comes first, and so I have a higher degree of control of a more positive state here, which means I'm willing to go into a positive state because I don't need to experience the helplessness of volatility or the shame of helplessness in order to go into the higher state. I'm in an environment that makes that higher state stable. So this is key to taking control of your state. And be aware that, as the truth of the research that suggests that who your 5 closest friends are determines the direction you're going in life, and what, the average of who your 5 closest friends are, that kind of thing. You can use bursts of willpower, bursts of masculine energy to change your environment into an environment that is conducive to a positive state. You cannot use willpower indefinitely to have a positive state in an environment that is attacking the positive state chronically. Meaning that, like if you've got that drip of water, the drip of water that is constant will over time erode solid granite. And our willpower is not solid granite. So what happens is you have a really positive person come into a highly cynical, skeptical, disrespectful, dishonoring environment. And they say, hey, how about this? And they get punished. Yeah, you idiot. See how long you'll last. Da, 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 da. Well, how about this? And they're actively resisted by the hostility and the judgment, and we're going to wait around. You'll see. It's not like it is where you come from. Da, 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 da. And that energy will pull the one person down. to where they will ultimately have that energy well up in them, like, hey, what about this? What about this? But then they already know that no matter what they do, it's going to be knocked down. And so this requires a sociopathic or masculine intervention to see, can the people be won around? Is there a way, like, can I do something particularly nice? Is there a way around to change these people's energy towards me, to change the environment, or not? Or do I have to go into another environment? Like, I'm in Thailand as opposed to trying to change what's going on in the United States. Because it's easy to get on a plane. It's very, very, very hard to try and get busy, dissociated people to drop down into the feelings I'm dealing with that take time to deal with. And it's very, very easy to go into those feelings here. So it's getting in a plane 18 hours is nothing, absolutely nothing compared to a 24/7 fight against one's culture. Create a future that supports your state. This is one of the most pivotal things because it goes back to taking control of your state. And to understand this, I want you to imagine that you're in prison, falsely convicted for a crime that you are going to be let out of in 5 hours. On the other side of those prison gates, there is a media, there is your family, the governor of the state has come to apologize. Everyone knows you didn't do it. Everyone knows what you've been through. Everyone knows that it's wrong. Everyone knows that you belong in this community, and that it was wrong, and that it wasn't your fault, and that you're owed an apology, and you're going to get one. So you're in the prison cell, and you know with certainty that this is going to happen in 5 hours. How are you feeling? Upbeat, excited, triumphant, happy, blah, 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 blah. Now I want you to imagine you're in the same prison cell, and you're falsely convicted and all that, and you are absolutely certain that the state has zero interest. They don't want to see your new evidence. They've never apologized to anyone. It's going to take them 3 years just to reject your latest plea. It's a dismal situation. Half of your friends think you're a criminal when you're not. You could be facing the next 30 years here. Your daughter is growing up. She's 7 years old. She feels absolutely helpless because her father's abandoned her. You know the statistic. You're reading a lot in prison. You would do anything to help your daughter, but you are stopped. You cannot do what you want to do as a father. And far from apologizing for this incredible, cruel injustice, you have people trying to get elected again. You hear them on the news talking about how they need to be more tough on crime and all that. And you just feel disgusted, despair, da-da-da-da-da. You're in the prison. It's the exact same cell. Your reality is completely different. This is why create a future that supports your state with certainty. How do you do it? You've got to create something with the realm of probability. So, going back to that situation, you've been falsely convicted, you're in a sociopathic country, in a sociopathic prison system, you cannot have any certainty that justice is going to be done, da-da-da-da-da. So that's not a realistic certainty. But what if you place your certainty, I'm absolutely certain because of the statistic, da-da-da-da-da, that after 3 requests, every one of my library books are brought. So it takes 3 months. So in 3 months, I have a 98% chance of being able to read this very important book. And in another 3 months, I have another 98% chance of reading this. And because of my determination, I have an 80% chance of being able to study this, and this while in prison. I have a chance of being able to write this book. And I have the certainty that while I may die unfairly convicted, etc., that because of my book, at least 100 people will not have to suffer this in the future. And I am certain about that, and I feel great about it. This is creating a future that supports your state within the realities of your boundaries. This is an incredibly important tool in creating state. and in being willing, even in the most unfair and outrageous situations, bullying, abuse by your country, by your other abused peers, by your parents, etc., you can still do something that is phenomenal. Finally, for most of us, out of prison and all that, work with all domains. You've got 5 senses: touch, taste, smell, noise, sight. Create an environment. Look at this. This environment supports this talk. It adds 50% ease in staying on point. And I've given it to myself, meaning I got a bit frustrated in some of these talks. I felt frustrated and I couldn't stop being frustrated, meaning every time I lost my thread, I felt frustrated. And I couldn't just say, oh, well, don't care, because I do care. I care. So that's trying to use willpower to change your state in an unfriendly environment. So I said, okay, I've got to change the environment. My first thing I went out and bought a plexiglass clear thing. And I thought I would stand behind the plexiglass, make a frame, draw on it so that I could always see you. You could always see me. And we both look at the drawings together. The trouble is, the lights coming this way would bounce off the reflection. It didn't work. It was a nightmare. I failed to change the environment to reduce my frustration. Then, again, what do? Do I give up doing filming? Or another thing. So then I see this whiteboard and I think about it. How will it be? I don't know. I have never used a whiteboard. So I go out and I buy it because it's so cheap. It's $10. And I hang it up. My first presentation is a success. My state goes up. I feel more in control. I have eliminated that particular frustration, which boosts my confidence, which boosts my state. So now I'm more interested in doing more videos. That gives me control of my state, because when I'm focusing 100% on a topic, whatever it is, I have more control of my state in that moment than almost any other time. And I can do it anytime. It's fun, So this is an outlet in which I experience control, positive control, and then it's fun. I imagine that there is a future in which someone, whether it's a year from now, 5 from here, that's learning something great about this. And I'm excited about that. And I feel certain, not that there aren't trolls, not that there aren't all kinds of stuff like that, but I feel certain that amidst that, there's someone that has the power to be helped. And I'm excited to be that doorway. And I'm certain that I can be. The painful part, the uncertain part that's, a big downer, is knowing what I'll have to wade through, and so pros and cons. But I then created the whiteboard. It was great. Then what happened is I got involved with this big project down here. I've got another whiteboard down here. And I got 40 hours into it. It's a really fun life map that I'm recording, and I got 40 hours into it. Then I got overwhelmed. And then meanwhile, all these ideas kept coming up, and this was becoming a block because it's a 100-hour project. I'm only 40 hours into it, and I needed to take a break from that, and I didn't want to erase the drawing. So then I just bought another whiteboard. Now then what happened was the pens were dropping, and then I wanted to do some painting at one point. I brought in some paint. One of the paint jars fell down, broke on the floor. My dog's eating glass and blue paint. I feel outraged. It's like I'm giving my all to this, and then some bottle just falls down. I can't control my state. So I go to the local shop and I buy this shower thing with suction cups that clips onto the thing. Now I can put paints in here. I test it. It doesn't fall down. I've now got a certainty. I've got a place for this. My creativity expands. So what I want you to see is I'm using masculine to change the environment, to protect and support my state. I did other things. I've put rubber dots on the door frame so that all the doors close quietly, so that I'm not jolted and shocked and then lose my state when my girlfriend shuts a door. Now I've got protection from that source of shock. These things, when you have PTSD and when you're highly sensitive, have a 10 to 30 times bigger impact than the normal annoyance. I mean, normal annoyance is not going to take you out of a state from joy down to despair. But when you are shocked into a PTSD sensation to fight, and you're just there, and it's going to take you hours and you're not quite sure how to get back, that can be a big downer. And I'm making this video ultimately so that the rest of the population can understand people with this sensitivity and PTSD, whether it's a dog or a daughter or a sister or a lover or a husband, and that people with PTSD can feel like someone's speaking on their behalf as opposed to just shaming them constantly, and they know they can't articulate it in a way that someone else can understand. And so that's why I'm making this video. And because the brain is wired and leans hard to the negative, if you can eliminate this domain of negativity, it is dramatically more impactful than adding an experience of positivity while leaving this kind of despair, volatility in place. And I'm actually in that category of feeling like I've had experiences around this that leave me feeling highly invisible and unseen, with no way to do anything about it. So this becomes a way. Hey, watch this video, you'll know what I'm talking about. Work with all dimensions. So touch. I've got the temperature the way I'd like with the air conditioner. Taste. Eat things that make you feel and sustain your state. Smell. My girlfriend loses it when she's near a garbage truck. It just makes her want to vomit. She can't control her state near a garbage truck, so you control the environment. She holds her breath as we drive by on the motorbike, etc. So she has her control mechanism. She uses her masculine to block her senses until she's out of the area so that her state doesn't get lost. Noise. I'm in a relatively quiet situation, though. The carpenter next door is starting work as we speak. Sight, having things like this, hanging my girlfriend's drawing here, or painting. It's beautiful. It brings me enormous pleasure to have some of the art that I love. This was just done by the prior tenant here, but some of the art that I've bought it's just very, very, very satisfying. Work with your body, create rituals, meditation, dance, poetry, work. Like this is work for me. Visualize future. I've been doing that a lot today and really lifting my state by seeing what I can do that I didn't have the imagination to know. It's just absolutely stunning and it's so exciting. And then achieve goals. Once you visualize futures, create futures that support your state, take immediate action to make them happen. And so, I'm writing down book titles. I'm doing this talk, as soon as I finish this talk and series of talks. I've got another project. I'm working on an app right now that has the possibility of raising my state stably by about 30%. That's the goal. Sharing it freely with anyone who wants to use it, but with a fair amount of certainty that knowing how my mind works, this app is going to raise my well-being. It's going to support me and my partner in growing our relationship. I'm excited about that. So I'm working on that. I'm achieving goals that are consistent with the kind of environment, anything that affects our senses, that will sustain the kind of state that I want to occupy. I'm really excited about that. So achieve those goals. Do something now. Take action. Spend money. Take time. Don't go into debt. But do take something that tells you that you can believe in you. Because what helps you, see, like going back to that prison analogy, the reason the one person feels triumphant and the other person feels bitter and helpless and all that, is they believe in that future. In one case, they believe. Now, when you're creating the future, because going back to that 500 mile per hour wind, you're in a tornado force that's beyond your control. But the reason I say it's a little bit paradoxical or, controversial is I want you to remember the 2008-2009 financial crisis, when my business, along with most other housing-related businesses in the United States, lost half of its, I lost 50% of my customers overnight. And I asked myself a powerful question. The question I asked myself was, is it possible for my business to grow while the industry as a whole is cut in half? Is that possible? And I said, yes, it is possible. It's not likely. I will have to do something that no one else is doing. I then asked myself, what could I do that no one else is doing that would allow my business to grow when everyone else's business is going down? In other words, the economy is the whole housing industry is being hit with 100 mile per hour wind pushing it down. But if you've got a certain technology, you can go against that wind and actually go upwind while the 98% of the industry and all that is going down. And I had an answer and went upwind. And so you want to achieve goals starting immediately. You visualize future and you make the commitment by doing something now that creates that future. This will increase your belief in that future as well as your intimacy, your ability to see and visualize the nuances of that future, making it more real. The more real it is the reality and the belief in the certainty of your positive future that allows you to have an extra 250% resiliency to the pulls that are constantly coming in from the news and the environment to attack your position in your state continuum. We all have this field from low to high, and there are environmental pressures every single day collapse our state down. What? So-and-so is dead? What? So-and-so sexually abused this? What? My teacher is abusing my daughter? What? This? And my government's now involved with, oh my goodness, now we're doing this. Now had my identity stolen. Oh my God. These are all environmental pressures that are shoving us down. When we feel out of control, we will voluntarily take up a defensive position at a low point in resonance, and we will actually defend it. I remember asking a woman on the plane, and this was bizarre to me. I said, do you want to feel more joy or happiness? And she said, no, not really. And I said, wait a minute, you don't want to be happy? If there's a way to improve your happiness, you don't want to know about it? You don't want to do it? She said, yeah, not really. She was defending a position she knew about, and she was suspicious of me. And what's the suspicion? It's either I'm trying to sell something, blah, 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 which I wasn't, or that I'm going to boost her hope or confidence, like pay $2,000 for a Create Your Own Reality workshop, and all you'll have is a $2,000 credit card bill at the end of that. And your friends are telling you you're an idiot and now you got to pay off that bill and you're no better off. Well, nobody likes that kind of, volatility. Like, oh, I can just visualize for 33 seconds and my whole reality is going to change, blah, 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 blah. No. And so this is a really important thing to understand. So do goals that support the futures and create the parts of the environment that will support your state. And then go to the core. Go to the core. Self-love and beauty are the essence of how we were all born. Every baby knows that they are amazing and is in this transcendent right brain feminine state of being connected with all that is. And they haven't learned that if they don't have a piece of paper, they're worth nothing, and They know how valuable they are. And this is back to that state. And there's an entire culture that's ganging up to say, no, you're absolutely nothing unless you do this, this, and this, unless you sleep with so-and-so, unless your partner's like this, unless your money is like this, unless your car, you're absolutely nothing. There's an incredible amount of pressure giving that message. Now, it's all BS, but it's BS in a paradigm in which, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need to belong. We need to feel loved. And when the rules are you got to buy into this BS to get that feeling, most of us are going to do it. And so it becomes this dance. My goal, because I believe that consciousness is medicinal, is to flood the dynamics with massive amounts of consciousness so that we can use our masculine energies to make different choices, to be more empathic than we might otherwise be, for example, to be more connected than we might otherwise be, to be more dynamic in taking action and achieving our goals than we might otherwise would. And for all of you that join me for this whole journey, it's been exhilarating. It's been volatile at times, in the several points I'm developing this idea, and I always feel a certain level of shame because the American masculine message is that real men are in control, and when you have PTSD, you're not. A little pin dropping over here has more control of my state than I do. And this is an aggravant. And then the aggravant can take hold, etc. So when the dog's interrupting and I just feel, I feel this moment of complete helplessness. It's like, I want to kill that dog. And then I haven't trained him yet to come. He's just a puppy. And so I can't even say come, because when I say come, he's another reminder that I have absolutely no control, because he doesn't come. He does what he feels like doing. And then I feel the state collapsing more. And then I think, this is outrageous. I'm making a video about state and I have no control of my own state, And then that brings my state down. And then it's like, well, this is why we need to talk about it. This is why we all grow. This is for me as much as it is for anyone else. And I learn and I watch so that next time, because the big aha for me in this whole dynamic is I've met people my whole life where I've offered an opportunity to have a rapid and radical increase in state, but it would have required them being less in control than they were of their current low-level state. And most of the time people have rejected being less in control of a higher state than being more in control of often absolute. Like I remember a woman in absolute suicide, weeping this and that and the other and da-da-da-da-da. And I said, well, if you'll give me some time, I will help turn this around and we'll work on this together. And this is a moment of trust. She didn't know me all that well. And she turned away and continued her state that she was certain she could maintain. And it's kind of funny if someone's would really rather commit suicide rather than be in a volatile situation. But sometimes the thing that what you're really trying to escape in the suicide, etc., is the feeling of helplessness. And so if someone else lifts you up, like, as you're a little girl, little boy, you enjoy it when your mom or dad, if they're halfway empathic and healthy, lift you up and swing you around. They're totally in control of your joy. But the more you experience situations in which, when you've surrendered that control, that innocence, you've been raped, you've been lied to, you've been betrayed, you've been embezzled, etc. Then when someone says, hey, you want me to lift you up and throw you, what goes through your mind is don't lose control, don't lose control, don't lose control, whatever you do. I'd much rather stay suspicious, cynical in this than risk having you lift me out and then do something to me, and then I feel like a complete shit and have no control over my state. So this is key to understanding that, and this will then help me have a language with that. So I hope it gives you the same tool when you meet someone who is holding on. You love them to death. You want to do anything you can for them. They're in absolute misery, and if they'll just take your hand and come over here, you'll guide them out of that hell. But all that's going through their mind is what it'll be like if they start and they lose their familiar terrain and they take your hand and you start walking. And then you abandon them in the dark cave of their despair. And then they've got the abandonment to deal with as well as the letdown. And nothing they can do about it because you were the one in control. So they're really protecting themselves from that. So this requires great tenderness and discussions about trauma in the book. The Body Keeps the Score, and healing trauma, and The Body Never Lies. Alice Miller goes into some of this terrain, and Brene Brown, and shame, and John Bradshaw, and Robert Bly and his work with men. So into this terrain, we can start having compassion rather than shaming the people who hold tightly onto negative states when they've never had the safety to be in an environment where someone would catch them and lift them in their state even if they fell. Thanks for spending the time, and I'll see you on the next week.